Hi, my name's Karan Anand and I'm a director at Monitor Deloitte based in Sydney, and I'm really excited to be sharing this Knowhow interview with you. I've been in management consulting for the last 12 years, of which 10 have been at Deloitte, and I focus there on strategy consulting in financial services. I know how hard this part of life can be for graduates even in normal times, and how hard it must be during this unprecedented COVID-19 period. I remember being a final year uni student in 2007, applying for jobs during the global financial crisis and getting rejection after rejection, both pre-interview and post-interview. I've recorded this interview for the sole purpose of helping you get the information I wish I had when I was a final year student. I promise you'll get an in-depth understanding of what a graduate management consultant actually does, how to frame your application from the perspective of the people reviewing it, how to master the virtual interview, and the all-important writing your application if you've got poor grades or you've got poor extracurriculars, plus much, much more. I've attached 3 of my answers to this introduction. The first one, which answers the question, what is the difference between all the fields of consulting? The second one answers, what is the one important thing candidates don't do at the start and end of their interviews? And finally, which degrees are ineligible for management consulting? To listen to the other 15 questions and answers I've recorded, go to www.getknowhow.com.au. If you really want to understand what management consulting recruiters are looking for and how to prepare for a management consulting career, you'll listen to this interview. Happy listening and good luck. The consulting industry is quite broad. So what I'll do is I'll break this question down into a basic segmentation of the market, what that means for what projects each firm or a team within a large firm might do, then how you can understand when you read through their website or when you're going through the applications and then interviews what a weird team or a weird sounding firm name actually might mean, and then how you can assess finally whether you're a fit for the type of work or the type of firm. So the first thing to note, if you're thinking about strategy consulting in particular, is that the old perception of McKinsey, BCG, and Bain only doing strategy work, and that they also have a monopoly on strategy work, is false. And it's been false for at least 10 years. So I want you to delete this perception from your mind. The other thing to note is that strategy is not the only interesting or most prestigious work available. I'm a strategy consultant, but I know that different types of consulting are important, more important perhaps, given the client's context, and this is important for you to note as well. Don't go in with an egotistical belief that there's some sort of hierarchy in the consulting profession. We do different things based on our level of expertise and our area of interest. First thing, let me start with a rough segmentation. Consulting firms vary quite significantly. Firstly, there are, call them the full service firms, and here I'm talking about the Big Four and Accenture specifically. And we will do all the disciplines of consulting, from strategy to technology, from human capital, which is HR consulting, to actuarial, and from digital and customer and marketing consulting through to finance transformation. The second set of firms, I'm going to call them the strategy plus firms. So here I'm talking about the McKinsey, BCG, or Bain, or also known as MBB. Whilst their history and their legacy was born out of strategy, or in McKinsey's case, accounting engineers or organizational design, they mostly do other stuff now. The third segmentation is the tier 2 strategy plus firms. So this is a level down from the MBB. So I'm talking about firms like LEK or Oliver Wyman. They are similar and more niche versions of the strategy plus firms with their own special slant. So Oliver Wyman, which is one of the examples I discussed, they'll focus predominantly on financial services. Then there are the IT specialists, so Infosys, Wipro, Tata Consultancy Services, IBM. They do everything that relates to what a CIO, Chief Information Officer, or CTO, Chief Technology Officer, needs done, either from a strategy perspective, implementation perspective, or offshore support perspective. Next, there are strategy boutiques. These are slowly dying out. Really, they're getting acquired by bigger firms. So a couple of examples that used to exist: Port Jackson Partners in Sydney, which was acquired by EY recently. Pacific Strategy Partners, which a few years ago was acquired by Deloitte. These are few and far between, but they keep popping up as well. And then finally, there are a bunch of other specialist firms I'm not going to go into, but they do things like leadership consulting, supply chain, procurement, implementing particular IT systems. There are countless of these firms. They keep popping up and growing or dissolving or getting acquired and merging. I don't have a working knowledge of all of them, but I'll give you some tips on how you might want to determine, if you are getting interviews with one of these, how you might want to frame what the work is that they actually do and how you get into that. So this segmentation can be academic unless it's applied to considering what it means for you as a prospective applicant. And the way to think about understanding this when you're looking to apply for a Big Four, for example, and they've got 10 consulting divisions within their consulting group, is to think about which executive they're advising. So there'll be consultants who'll be focused on problems the CEO cares about, and we'll call those strategy consultants. And there'll be ones who are focused on what the CHRO, i.e. the head of human resources, or the CIO, the chief information officer, will be focused on. And the first lot of those will be called human capital consultants. The second lot will be called IT or technology consultants. And then within a particular focus, so take CIO focus, for example, there'll be different competencies in there. So you could be in the strategy competency or the implementation competency in the CIO focus practice. And the way to think about what the work is, it's a combination of those two things. Which executive are you focused on, and what is your competency in relation to that executive? So if you're a strategy focused consultant in the CIO agenda, you're going to be doing technology strategy work. And what that means is things like, what should the future of my IT organization be? How do I simplify my enterprise architecture? Which technology investments should I be making over the next 3 to 5 years? And if you think about it even more practically than that, the real difference between these is the nature of the projects you do. Secondly, the length of the project. Thirdly, the degree of ambiguity. And fourthly, the size of the team you're working with. So going through each of those 4 things, if you're in a strategy team, meaning you're advising the CEO on a constant basis, you're working on shorter projects, which are likely more ambiguous in a smaller team. You take the other extreme, which is working in tech implementations, you're working on system implementation projects, which are longer. The scope is generally more clearly defined from the outset, and you're working in larger teams. Now, this may sound a little bit confusing, a little bit abstract, and hard for you to connect with. That's okay. It may not mean much until you get into the job itself, but then it'll mean a lot, because being very thoughtful around where you want to land will determine how much you'll enjoy your job and then how you progress in your career. But if you're applying for a boutique firm and you're not sure what their specialization is, what I'd suggest is you ask them either during the application or find out prior or when you're in the interview which function or which job title within the client they normally advise. So who are you generally speaking to from a client perspective? And then after that, ask them to describe their last couple of projects. And what you're listening for during this description is the verb that they're using to describe their work. So are they advising or are they implementing? And that'll give you a sense of, do they have more of a strategy tenor or do they have more of an implementation tenor, which then connects back to the types of work I was talking about previously. Finally, the really important question for you is to determine where you're best suited for based on the knowledge you have about yourself now as a university student. And here's a really simple self-assessment you might want to consider for yourself. So if you think about the lectures you've been attending for the last 12 or 18 months, do you prefer listening to, focusing on, or understanding why a lecturer is teaching you something, or what the method of inquiry was that the person who developed the theory or the formula or whatever it is that you're learning came up with that you're learning on the day? Or are you more interested in working out how you optimize the learning to nail the calculations in order to better your chances in an exam? If it's the former, maybe strategy is better for you because there's a little bit more of an intellectual bias, and the method of inquiry is more abstracted, focusing on the why of certain matters, whereas the latter may be better for you to focus on the implementation side because you're more focused on getting on with things. This test by no means is a surefire way of determining that, but it's a good way to reflect and internalize. But also remember that because the industry is so mature and so diverse, once you get in, you can learn a bit and you can move around, but it's good to have an appreciation of how the segmentation works such that you can make an informed choice now. I won't talk about the obvious ones here, which I expect you already know. Don't be late. Make sure you prepare. Make sure you dress appropriately based on the type of interview you're going for. Let me talk about a real bugbear of mine. I don't think it's something people practice. They either know it naturally or they don't, but I think you can practice and prepare for this. And the real bugbear of mine is the inability to do small talk. So think about the actual physical experience of an interview process. And of course, I'm talking about face-to-face interviews here, but it is applicable in a virtual environment too. You might go from meeting your interviewer in the lobby or the reception of the building. You'll walk with them to the meeting room. You might sit down. If it's a big firm, a waiter may come in to take a coffee order, and so you'll be waiting for that. You'll place the coffee order. You might have some small talk there before the formal interview starts. You do the interview, you get to the end. This is a huge point now. You get up from the interview, you walk out with the interviewer, you walk into the reception, and they might say bye to you there. Sometimes they have to go to another floor themselves, so they'll wait for the lift with you, they'll get in the lift with you, they'll walk down to the lift with you, they'll walk into the lobby of the building with you because they're going in a different direction. At the start of that interview, at the end of that interview, even after the interview, there's lots of moments there where time needs to be filled with conversation. Note that through this whole process, not just in the formal 1 hour part in the room, you're still being interviewed. And so the burden is on you to create small talk. Not being able to engage on small talk is a real no-no for me. And I see it with people when they walk out of the interview, they're already processing their post-interview analysis when they should be doing that when they're out of my sight. If you struggle with small talk or you get nervous super easily around interviews, here's a few pointers to have in the back of your head on questions you might ask. And remember, good small talk is just you asking interesting questions and letting the other person talk. So ask them about their day. If it's an afternoon interview, that's great. Ask them what they've been up to today. Ask them where they've just come from. If it's a consulting interview, have they come from client side? Are they working on a project right now? Ask them about the project. Ask them about the client to the extent that they can share that with you. And if you have any other general questions on the firm or the recruitment process that you weren't able to cover off inside, ask them there again. If it's a morning interview, ask them what they've got on for the rest of the day. Do they have a busy day on? Do they have a busy week on? What's the nature of the work that's on right now? All these questions are really important, and some of the answers can go for minutes, which is the whole entry process or the whole exit process. The key here is to make sure that A, you don't have any dead time, and to B, keep the conversation focused on questions about your interviewer. I know that people who engage me on small talk well at the start and at the end of the interview really come up well in my good books. All degrees are relevant for management consulting. There is no degree which is ineligible. I've worked with people who've got PhDs in physics, ex-military people, lots of arts, science, medicine students, way too many commerce and engineering graduates, literally the whole spectrum. You've probably heard the adage that we don't care what you studied just as long as you've excelled in it. And that's definitely true. So for those of you who are hoping that a law actuarial double degree or some weird combination like that helps you get a consulting interview over a Bachelor of Arts, it's really only your grades that matter. So a HD average in arts will carry a lot more weight than a pass average in law/actuarial, assuming they're from similar universities. Also, know that your degree and your grades will only get you as far as the interview. After that, they're basically irrelevant. They're not relevant in the application process, and they're not at all relevant in your career as well, because you're starting from scratch. We get a question as to whether commerce gives you an advantage a lot of times. It does, but it's not huge. In fact, over time, I've probably seen more engineers who become better consultants in the long term because they're better structured problem solvers from the outset, from their degree. And that's an important point because it's less your degree that's going to help you succeed in consulting. It's more your ability to problem solve, which is going to help you. And your ability to understand what the drivers of business are and how businesses and human beings work. And getting smart at that, regardless of which background you're from, is really, really important. If you are feeling underprepared for your interviews though, or your transition into the career from university, and you really want to prep, here's a few tips on things to read or listen to before you embark on the application process or before you start the career. So a few books for you to consider. Firstly, The McKinsey Way, great book to start with. Secondly, Playing to Win by Roger Martin and A.G. Lafley. And thirdly, The Lords of Strategy. Some good podcasts to get your head into people who think in first principles and who are very good at the intersection of tech and business. Exponent. Listen to Knowhow's podcast, that's Naval, and the A16Z podcast, Andreessen Horowitz, which is a large venture capital firm in Silicon Valley, have fascinating podcasts on a range of tech and business topics. And then if you're looking for some blogs or magazines or websites, Harvard Business Review, excellent content. David Perel writes excellent content. McKinsey's, Deloitte's content is excellent. Have a read through their websites and get familiar with the language, get familiar with the way people break down problems and the way they present recommendations to common or emerging business problems. So to summarize, there is no degree which is irrelevant or ineligible. There's no degree that really advantages you more than the other, but grades do matter. So if you've got the option, choose an, I'm saying this in inverted commas, an easier degree in which you can get good grades in from a recognized university rather than a really difficult degree where you know you're going to struggle. And regardless of where you are in the process, read and listen to the publications I've listed out above. They will help you to sound smarter in the interviews, and if you get the job, they will help you do your job better.